Good morning, YouTube tubers. Jason Lawrence here. It's about 8:30 in the morning, almost 9 o'clock on the 25th of April 2014 here in Colorado. I don't typically make videos like this using this format with the screen, uh, but I wanted to highlight a particular experience I had recently that I think has value to a greater community of activists, citizens, uh, professionals in various business capacities. And I wanted to share it in this way and at this time because it happened rather recently, so it's fresh in my mind, and I've only recently done the research to get a better understanding of what occurred and perhaps why. So I'm going to explore some of that stuff with you. And I start here on the Noble Energy website because this story is really about this organization, but also in part what they represent. And I'm wanting to learn more and understand more about what truly they do represent. And of course, they have a lot of information on their website, particularly involved in oil and gas exploration. You can read about their values, their mission, founded in 1932. Quite a large company, and they have holdings in uh, a number of particular locations. But the one that interested me the most was in Colorado, and I'll explain here in a moment why. But their corporate mission, their purpose is to energize the world and better people's lives, which to me sounds noble by definition. They strive to provide energy for the world through finding and producing hydrocarbons. Now, they've made it specific here, and that's what's interesting to me, because it's not simply just about energizing the world. Now they make it clear through hydrocarbons, while positively influencing the lives of stakeholders. To us, the two responsibilities cannot exist separately. So how did I end up getting interested in an organization like Noble, their mission statement, and their leadership in environment, health, safety, compliance management? Well, I received a ping, if you will, from an intelligence analyst at Noble Energy via LinkedIn. I get a notice. I don't think it's a particularly unique setting to my profile. I imagine most of you who have LinkedIn accounts get these as well. But what stood out to me is that being involved in hydrocarbons would be somewhat odd that this gentleman would be looking at me to, for example, offer me a job. That seems out of the realm of possibility. But I'm not going to say that it's impossible. So at the very least, I wanted to understand a bit more about David V here, and through a pretty quick internet search, I found quite a bit of personal information about him, and I'll share some of that here in a moment. In particular, his full last name, which I find odd that he doesn't include in this professional profile. Specifically an intelligence analyst at Noble Energy. When I go to the Noble Energy website and I use their search function, I'm unable to find him. But it may be a large company, so he's difficult to find in that respect. So there was a little bit of a cloud of secrecy around, particularly not revealing his last name, but then also he's based out of Houston. I'm in Colorado. What would he have interest in me for? Why is this guy looking at my profile? So I began to look into both Noble Energy and this character, David Vielhaber, I've come to learn is his name. And I find out this article from Kathy Proctor in the Denver Business Journal that Noble Energy is planning to invest $2 billion in Colorado in 2014. I can't even fathom what that kind of money will buy in Colorado. But I can imagine that if someone were going to, an organization were going to spend that much money in a location, that they would want to get a pretty good sense of what the hazards and risks might be, whether they be geographic, socio-political, the full spectrum. This amount of money, I suspect, even for a company like this, is not chump change. So they're going to put maybe their best people on trying to gather intelligence around the environment that they're heading into. Makes sense. My military background would suggest that that's prudent. So what do I find out about David V here? Well, in finding his resume, and here's his personal email, and I suspect, I'm not sure if it works, but you could probably send him an email yourself, and I certainly have. I've certainly got more questions for him. But what I was most interested in is some of his background, and particularly what stood out to me was his involvement in terrorism and non-proliferation, which certainly piqued my interest, being involved in an organization that really is about finding and producing hydrocarbons. So perhaps I'm certainly aware of a potential terrorist threat, and I put that word in quotation, terrorist threat in Middle Eastern countries where hydrocarbons are rich. But domestic terrorists, because he also has links to Department of Homeland Security, and I'll get to that in just a moment here, because it pretty clearly is revealed in more of his particular profile and background. But I start here at one of the schools that he went to. You'll recognize that face. They look the same to me. But here's a story about faculty-student collaboration between David V. and Professor Philip Bleek, and their participation in the Department of Homeland Security's Domestic Nuclear Detection Office in Washington, D.C., together with START. Well, I found out that after David's work in this particular arena, I think he was working on a master's degree, he went to work for START. And START, I learned, is involved in the study of terrorism and responses to terrorism. Wow, this is fascinating now. Okay, so this character, David V., is looking at my profile on behalf of Noble Energy, and his background is in terrorism and the responses to terrorism. Stated clearly, this is the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. If you go to their website, I'm not going to waste the time right now, but you'll see that he did in fact work there. They've got his face. I think it's even the same picture he uses here for START. So again, I'm asking myself the question, why is this intelligence analyst interested in me? Is it possible that this organization is trying to assess the risks of this environment and identifies me as a potential terrorist threat to their operation, which I find even more fascinating, and I suppose to some extent a little honored in that respect that I would garner that sort of attention. But maybe I'm a bit deluded in that respect. So we recently had a flood here in Colorado, and Kathy Proctor goes on to report in another Denver Business Journal article about Noble Energy and folks like them having issues in Colorado with respect to leaks, and that's particularly important to me because that's where my efforts lie. And I focus my energy and efforts on trying to improve air and water quality. Why? Because I see them as two fundamental survival needs. And if you look at my profile, and I know that David was, certainly you go through here and it shows a picture of me, but it shows my full name, and that I have a background in engineering, that I provide services as a sustainability consultant in the greater Denver area, but primarily on renewables and environment. And is this what concerned David and the folks that he represents at Noble? Perhaps because I have previous work in solar installations, wind power, Again, here's wind power. I have a background in spiritual studies. None of this seems to me to relate to hydrocarbons, so I can't imagine that they're looking at my background and skill sets because they want me to come work for them. Although possible, and I'd certainly entertain that conversation. I'd find it quite fascinating, to be frank. You go all the way to the bottom of my profile, and a lot of my skills and endorsements are around leadership and sustainability. And I fundamentally don't believe that the use of hydrocarbons as a keystone in our energy infrastructure is a sustainable model, simply stated. And not because I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, tree-hugging hippie. I started out as an Air Force fighter pilot, and it was clear to me that after flying an airframe in defense of our nation and our interests, which are primarily oil-based, if you didn't know that, I'll reveal that newsflash to you all now. In flying an airframe that got 3 gallons to the mile in fuel, and that's not a mistake. I meant to say 3 gallons to the mile and not the inverse. It was clear to me that the efforts that we're putting into securing hydrocarbons was an exceedingly expensive business. My airframe alone cost $10 million, but if you're aware of the over budget on the F-35 and F-22 airframes, those are leaps and bounds more expensive. Ours was a relatively fuel-efficient airframe, but also a inexpensive one, but quite effective at its job. So I have a background in flying aircraft. I was trusted with lethal force and national assets, and I decided this is not a sustainable model. And if we're going to be leaders in the world, we need to be taking on a much different position, claiming a higher moral ground. And as I understand the definition of the word noble, could take 2 particular meanings. One, belonging to a hereditary class with high social or political status, the aristocracy, and recent studies that suggest that we live in America in an oligarchy would lend credibility to this statement here. Or the second, having or showing fine personal qualities or high moral principles and ideals. I go back to the mission statement at Noble Energy. Energizing the world and bettering people's lives certainly speaks to me of high moral principles and ideals. And I hope that the organization does truly assert that position, because it seems to me what's occurred here is that oil executives, like those at, I suspect, a place like Noble Energy, are focusing on military-style psyops because they face an insurgency, particularly by those opposed to hydraulic fracturing. And let me be clear on this point. I'm not opposed to natural gas exploration. I'm not even opposed to oil exploration. What I'm opposed to is diesel fuel, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, those sorts of things occurring in my water. I don't know about you folks, but I'm aware of plenty of information and first-hand accounts of people that are having their drinking water poisoned. So if you look at me, this guy here, and we'll go back to my profile and the kind of work that I do. I was involved in wilderness therapy. I was an education coordinator. This was an unpaid position. Here I got about $100 a day, and I was doing pretty well. I felt lucky to receive that. Substitute teacher, about $100 a day. I was a lead instructor for Outward Bound at $65 a day. Again, a substitute teacher in a different school district. Guest lecturer for CU Science Discovery, paid rather modestly. Coordinator for Veterans Green Corps. I got $10 an hour working for this guy, making consumer goods out of bicycle tubes and things of that nature. I worked for a construction company, integrating green building processes at $18 an hour. I was an instructor for survival education, in part as a volunteer, but I also got paid modestly for teaching military kids. You can see a couple of videos about that activity there. Probably my best paid jobs were in the energy industry, but specifically wind turbines, where I was a traveling technician, which meant at any given time I'd travel to any place throughout the U.S. To work on wind turbines. And then most recently as an engineering technician and test engineer involved with Boulder Wind Power and a next generation utility scale wind. So none of this involves, oh, and finally, I think I made $18 an hour as an installation technician for Nesco, putting in a solar garden in Breckenridge. So none of this paid exceedingly well, and certainly none of these organizations pay me to make a video like I am here. What I also do, though, is this mission, and this is what drives my life, my ambition, what is most important to me. And my educational mission is to inspire leaders in energy and environmental conservation, with a spiritual mission to inspire growth and transformation as a life path, a charitable mission, because all of this stuff that I do is at no fee, but also do I make nothing for it. Inspire community connectivity and development through collaboration and cooperation. And then also exploring new ways and means, specifically beyond hydrocarbons, for harmonious life on Earth and among the cosmos. And I do this stuff when I'm not involved in this stuff, because this is what pays me, a pittance. This is what really feeds my soul. And being involved in wind turbine technology and progressive transportation, I ride an electric bike as well as have a modified vehicle. My wife has an electric car. Our modified vehicle runs on vegetable oil. We're really making an effort to find alternatives, and I acknowledge the importance that hydrocarbons play in our life. I'm not a fool in that respect, but I'm also aware of the lies and deception that are inherent in the Petro-fascist control structure, as Dr. Greer speaks so fondly of in much of his work. But how does someone who's involved in these sorts of activities, outdoor education, counseling, teaching, working with veterans, and at very little cost, how does he compete with someone who is investing $2 billion to energize the world and better people's lives? So I put forth to you, when assessing the motivation of certain people, is it Jason that's trying to deceive you by way of sharing a video on his own time and at no pay and for no pay? Is it me that's trying to deceive you? Or are these folks that are identifying an insurgent, non-supportive group of people, and all of this I'm putting in quotations because to me it has my eyebrows raised, and really a deep fundamental question of how can this possibly be that we've gotten to this place that because I opposed poisoning water, and that's really what this means right now, the technologies that we have now, that's what this means, is poisoning people's drinking water and air. And if you don't believe that, you really need to do a whole lot more research than what you've been fed via mainstream sources. But are these people really these people really involved in an insurgency as domestic terrorists that some entity like the Department of Homeland Security needs to be concerned about? Because again, I'll go to my profile here and you can see that my background in education, certainly I would have had to have been vetted at the top secret and secure compartmentalized information level to do this job. But beyond that, my education was 4 years at a service academy. So you mean to tell me that after 4 years at a service academy, where their goal is to create leaders within our particular military industrial framework, and not only that, but I was at the top 5% of my class. So you're saying to me, I was identified as an outstanding group honor representative, you're saying to me that 4 years here, 4 years serving active duty, or just shy of 4 years serving active duty as an Air Force pilot, puts me in the position of being a domestic terrorist? Wow. What if it's simply the case that I want to help people live better lives too, and maybe with regard to the mission statement that Noble has, maybe we're on a very similar track. We just happen to disagree on one incredibly crucial point here. how we're going to go about doing that. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts here. This is some of the work that I do, and maybe this is what's causing alarm with David V, or why he's taken interest with his background in responses to terrorism and his role, rather subtle role. It's not an overt role. He doesn't have his full name on the website, and I can't find him at Noble Energy. His subtle role in connection to Department of Homeland Security involved in this sort of ferreting out of terrorist threats. Is he concerned that I'm making videos about troubleshooting our Dodge Ram 4x4? Or maybe he is concerned that I'm identifying this Stasi role that our own local FEMA began to play with regard to their response to a flood-ravaged city. Or maybe he finds that it's a domestic terrorist threat that I found a way to run my camp stove on Everclear. It seems to me that it's possible that in assessing risks, maybe what Noble is really concerned about is that I'm challenging and exposing the techniques, these military psyops techniques that these organizations are using. And by organizations, I'm not only referring to Noble, I'm referring to Shell Oil. When I expose a Delphi technique at a supposed community forum as they try to coerce public opinion, and was told that I wasn't allowed to film, and yet, again, given my background, I happen to know quite clearly that certain fundamental rights that we possess as Americans, and specifically with regard to the Constitution, free speech is protected, and filming at a public forum where officials in the execution of their duties are being observed is totally protected by that First Amendment. And similarly, the classic case is any officer in the execution of their duties, particularly police officers, but in this case it was a representative of Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and then also reference to our own Governor Hickenlooper's consumption of hydraulic fracturing fluid as something of a publicity stunt. In this particular video, a woman, this one here, sorry, but at this forum, both these go together, a woman acknowledged that no, in fact, that particular product is not used in Colorado because our geology doesn't support it. What Governor Hickenlooper drank was Clean Stim, a Halliburton product, and that's not used here. We use instead a somewhat proprietary slurry here in Colorado that is leaching into groundwater and does have an impact on public health, and that's what's of primary concern to me. Or maybe he's really concerned that I'm out at our remote property and we've got a bear breaking into our camper. Surely that can't represent a domestic terrorist threat. But I suspect that this involvement here locally, inspiring community members and being a part of inspired community members that are speaking out for their own communities. Again, none of these people in this video were being paid to be a part of this. They take their own time because they care about the world that we live in and the world that we're growing up in and raising our children. It certainly is not a $2 billion industry to walk down the streets of Walsenburg making your voice heard and saying you don't want your air and water to be poisoned. Or maybe he has concern that I'm willing to walk into Verizon and confront particular employees about NSA disclosures. I suspect he's probably most concerned about these videos that I make here when I actually go out to a site and stand on public property and film in high definition and high resolution with extreme and excruciating detail the kinds of activities that go on these hydraulic fracturing sites. Because I happen to have somewhat of a background in occupational safety. I was a safety officer for ground and flight operations for a fighter squadron, and I understand the impact of toxic releases and how things need to be accounted for with regard to MSDS labeling, etc. and that there are appropriate ways to dispose of certain hazardous chemicals. And when I bring that information to light in the midst of these operations that are going on, when I take this to the field, and it's not just about what occurs on a website and what people say that they're about, when they say that they are leaders in environment, health, and safety compliance management and corporate citizenship, when that is the public face that they put out, and I go out and specifically in the field challenge that directly, maybe that's what he's concerned about. Or, David, perhaps this is where you can best utilize my skills, because I bring a level of scrutiny, a watchdog look on these operations that demands the integrity that people of this community, and also, David, your community in Houston, as an example, need in order to safeguard our most precious resources. And those most precious resources are not the $2 billion that you all are going to be investing in this state. Those most precious resources are the people, the air, the water, and the natural. And when I say natural, I mean this in the most extreme sense, but natural, renewable energy sources that we have in great abundance, solar and wind. So if you need someone, David, because you're looking at my profile and you're interested in the work that I do, to go out and inspect your safety operation and demand a public accountability that is of the highest caliber, I'm your guy. If you need someone to consult on transition to solar and wind because, frankly, your business model is a little bit too focused and narrow and is simply not going to survive the new age of energy, then again, I'm your guy. And if your focus is simply on me as a potential domestic terrorist threat, you're barking up the wrong tree. Thanks for watching, and please click subscribe, like. I'd love your respectful, informed comments in the section. I often get trolls showing up, especially around these particular topics, and I'm not for a moment intimidated by what you folks have to say about me or the information I bring. So let's keep it respectful, let's keep it honest, and let's continue to explore these challenges that we all face toward energizing our world and bettering people's lives.